Hey, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to be here. Slightly weird talking, but not being able to hear anything, so shout if nobody can hear me. I'm sure everybody can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI, its use, its abuse, talk a little bit about generative AI, why I'm not convinced we're quite there yet, some of the pitfalls, some of the issues, and maybe a little bit of amusement along the way. I'm Professor of Machine Learning at the University of Oxford, but also a scientific advisor to Mind Foundry, which is a university spin-out that's been going around about 10 years and does a lot of work in the insurance space, which is the connection today. So I'm going to start out by making the obvious comment that analysts think that somewhere around 40 to 60% of all the jobs around the world are going to be affected in some way by AI. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to lose our jobs. It means that some tasks within those jobs are going to be automated. Most jobs are not just a single task. So in the same way, the life of a GP or a consultant in a hospital is fundamentally different now to how it was 100 years ago because of technology. The job still exists. So I'm not convinced AI is going to remove jobs, but it is going to radically transform the way in which we work. That could be a great thing, but without some kind of checks and balances, it also could be a pretty worrying thing. It's clear that advanced economies are going to have the highest exposure to AI. We do not live in a world of AI democracy. We live in a world of AI differences around the world, and those differences are arguably getting even bigger, with the very large AI companies being associated with a single block, and in often cases a single country in the world, though that is changing. And of course, more advanced economies are already better equipped to cope with those AI changes. Automation has always been part of the economic growth of those countries. Very early industrial revolutions, the embracing of technology, the goal of economic growth through technological advancement. And that's a good thing, arguably, but it also means that those economies are also exposed to potential technological fragility. And that, again, is something that we need to be a little bit cautious of. When various financial magazines ran articles on the penetration of AI in the finance sector, including insurance, what they found is that almost everybody is already using AI. That we all know very much. But what we also find is that around about a quarter of those same practitioners who are early adopters and embracers of AI are also nervous or skeptical. They're rather concerned that they don't necessarily have a full understanding of what that AI is doing. And I think it's that understanding, that insight, well, it kind of works. I think it's doing what I want. But these analytic approaches have gone to a scale that I would argue is beyond human now. Do any of us really understand what's going on? It feels often as if we are negotiating a conversation with an alien. We're trying to work out a common language. It's not the same as trying to negotiate and work with another human being. And that out of context feeling is something that we all have when we do things with some kind of generative AI. Advanced economies have always been exposed to automation, but I think the automation has always been something that has been within technological grasp. And it means that we, the technologists who are inventing the technology, have an incredibly clear understanding as to where the failure modes, the limitations, and the bookends of that technology sit, even if they don't necessarily sell it as such. I would argue very strongly that in the AI community now, we are creating models that go beyond our capacity to fully understand capability and importantly, why these models produce what they do. It is very, very difficult to safeguard and put levels of guaranteed compliance. Yet, there is clear evidence that these AI automation processes are a real change for good in society. There was an entire breakout session at Davos where politicians from around the world, technologists and beyond, got together to look at ways in which the new wave of AI, which is in many ways a rebranding and an escalation of things we've known about for nigh on 15 years, how can that be used to help us solve some of the biggest problems that are out there? And my goodness, they're enormous problems. Social, economic, ecological, environmental, and the list goes on and on and on. So this is a great opportunity. If we get it right, there is an enormous amount to play for. And the productivity gains that people are claiming for AI automation in our society are absolutely vast. It is one of the largest growth sectors in the world. If you believe the upper limits, it will be vying and taking over energy sectors like oil and gas. So it really is, as Sundar Pichai said a decade ago, it really is more important than fire. So very prescient. We wait and see. The bookends are very broad, however. If we believe the optimists at the economic growth stage, this is going to be the largest sector on the planet. If we believe the pessimists, we could be entering a new AI winter. Pick your choice, somewhere in the middle. What are the kind of things that we do? Not just in the academic sector that I work on, but also what we do in the company, Mind Foundry. We take a pretty scientific approach, and science is all based around observing how we can make changes and create solutions, but then analytically going in and saying, do we really understand what the hell's going on? And if you don't understand, you keep experimenting until you at least have a theory, a conjecture as to how a system works. And that means you have some handle on its operation and most importantly, its risk. So in most cases, we do not work with unbounded, large generative AI models. We work with what I would call small, medium, and getting on for pretty gnarly language models. But importantly, they are at an edge where we as people can understand what's going on. Furthermore, we work in very narrow verticals where we constrain those models, not to look at the average of all the guff that's out there on the internet, but very particular, curated, trusted, provenance data sets. And I think that's a critical message that I would want to get across. We use things for things like summarization, for worrying a little bit about compliance in insurance, for looking at first notification assistance, and for knowledge representation, and that important thing of linking entities to make sure that we have a sort of forwards and backwards linkage so that we have a trusted provenance in the way information about clients, claims, and assets is being accessed. We use all this to do things like prevent large loss accidents. You can't prevent those accidents, but what you can do is get a handle on the propensity. Where, when, what, how are these things likely to happen? How can we factor this in a fair, equitable way, which is transparent to customers, so that then they understand that driving that fast at that time of day in crowded situations with that car isn't necessarily an insurable loss unless you're prepared to pay a very large premium. So I think insurance has got a lot of handles that it changes people's behavior. It's a little bit like governments, and it's one of the few sectors that has these levers that it could adjust, which naturally go ahead and change people's behavior. I think it's an enormously powerful sector when we get it right. And some of the insights that we have gained with our insurance partners have been truly useful. You go back and you can work then with customers to give them better deals, to give them alternate insurance policies, to say, well, actually, that's potentially very large loss, because actually you're not insured at that point, because you're on a private insurance policy, and you're clearly a delivery driver. So let's detect and offer reliable upfront alternatives where people say, oh yeah, hadn't thought about that, thank you very much. I'll pay another 10% and now I'm fully insured. So these kind of things I think are really important areas where full automation can help give human insight into human activity, and that after all is really the mainstay of insurance. Data. There was a very interesting article that was in the insurance press recently saying and this was at the end of last year, saying by this year, 60% of data used to train AI systems will be synthetic. I'm not going to try and do an impression of pulling myself by my bootlaces at this point, but there is an existential problem, of course, the moment we have systems that are reliant upon not real-world data. Don't get me wrong, there are many sectors where good, reliable data, especially about the tails of distributions, is fortunately few and far between. It would be unethical in medical data analysis to try and promote more incidents of rare diseases. In the same way that fortunately large losses in insurance are at the tails of events. So we do need some kind of synthetic data analysis. This journey is really just beginning. I think it could be a really exciting and interesting framework around which we can put synthetic data generation in place with AI models, which learn something reliable, not just about the bulk of distributions, but importantly about the things that we hope never happen, the large losses, the tail events, the things which are deeply problematic as risk-averse insurers. And I think that synthetic data is going to play an increasing role in the insurance community over the coming years. Truth really matters though, and I think even though synthetic data is something that we can create in abundance, if it does not obey the statistics of the real world, and importantly, we can't drive a path that takes us to that synthetic data from a reliable, realistic proposition right now. You can't just hallucinate and teleport data into the world around you. There needs to be a way, a plausible mechanism in that data generation process where that data could have come about from reliable, real-world foundations. And I think that, in my mind, is probably the biggest stumbling block with synthetic data at the moment. And I think no talk would be right without talking a little bit about generative AI in the future. Having said we're passionate about it, but in a scientific, bounded way, I think it's really worth taking a little step back and maybe looking at the generative AI experience, why I think it's wonderful, but at the same time, why I also am a little perturbed by the use of generative AI ad lib. We hear an enormous amount, from robots stealing jobs to evil AI taking over the world, and we know that this is a little bit of a press hype in order to sell newspapers, potentially. Though there is, like all things, a grain of truth involved in absolutely everything. This is not the first time that we've had these kind of apocalyptic commentaries. If you look back in the 1970s, we get teachers campaigning against calculators, saying that we're going to create a generation of idiots. That was kind of when I was at school, so I'll leave you to judge that. 1990s, we get fighting against computers, again, because there's this distrust of technology taking over from that human capacity to reason and balance things and come up with an objective, evidence-based decision. And then we have in the 2000s commentaries that say the internet itself is just going to be a passing fad. We are in another one of those phases. Will it be a fantastic boon? Will it be an absolute demon to society? And I think the jury is out. And in the same way as we never saw the apocalypse due to the use of pocket calculators, if anybody can remember what they are, it is because we use them and embrace them as part of a development in our society. Yeah, and you could argue that help us make better numerate decisions. So, where I'm going to start to talk a little bit about generative AI is to show something I call not so chatty GPT. And it's the ultimate not chatty, but it's breaking down what on earth is going on in these language models back to very basics. It's just the frequency of letters. Let's take a language like English. E occurs most frequently. And if you just sample these letters at random without worrying about the letter that came before, you get some really fun stuff. This is a genuine, and look what I got. Shoe, ankle, knee. How's about that? No context whatsoever. This is a blind random letter generator, and this is not going to be award-winning. So we can look at a little bit more context. So this is what statisticians will call a bigram. If you prompt with a first letter, I can give a frequency or a degree of belief that you'll get another letter. If we start with a prompt, S, and all I'm going to do is choose the most likely letter. I'm not going to randomly select. The next most likely is a T, then an I, then an N, and then we go to a G. And if you're the lead man of the police, that's music to your ears. I was really hoping it would come up with Steve, which is a plausible completion if you randomize this. But just with two letters, you begin to get a little bit of emergence of context. And if you bring in spaces and punctuation, you get a little bit more. One of my wonderful students, Holly Freed, took a really small language model. This is tiny. You can just run this in half an hour on your MacBook, and she trained it on all the works of Shakespeare and then said, okay, now I've shown you all Shakespeare, go away, and this is a small language model, go away and make some dialogue as if it was from Shakespeare. And you get this coming out. And you randomly choose it and you get another pseudo play. I particularly like it. You see, when I was at school, it all looks absolute gibberish, a bit like this. The thing I particularly like, and it's plausible. You know, with a little bit more training and a little bit more, a bigger model, you'd have something that would go, oh goodness, it's written a play. No, it's mimicking what it's been told, so, and it's reproducing stochastically that. My favorite is this name, Gorin Bopulet, which I'm absolutely guaranteed doesn't actually appear in Shakespeare. So my point here is we smile, and I love this, because we are easily deceived. Maybe you aren't, but I'm always impressed by this. Go away and create a poem about. And we give these models an enormous amount of credibility. Oh, it can write a poem, so it should be able to underwrite as well as write. Not necessarily, because what it really is a stochastic parrot. You give it all of Shakespeare, and it's going to kind of shake the box, a bit like the random number generator, the random letter generator, and it will create plausible Shakespeare-like creations, or it will create viable potential policies, but they are not necessarily doing anything other than interpolating, or even more dangerously, extrapolating beyond the edges of what you have shown them. There's recent papers coming from Google AI showing that GPT-like models, large language models, produce catastrophic failures out of sample. So we can train them with very large corpus of data, But if you push them a little bit beyond that boundary, they hallucinate, viable looking, but erroneous, beyond bookend solutions. And it's very, very difficult to put safeguards around our models. So, few examples. Midjourney, arguably one of the best stable diffusion style models. You say, go give me 5 apples. I actually cannot see a picture with 5 apples there. In fact, I think some of those apples are cherries. It's brilliant how it creates the pictures, but it's not quite worked out that there should only be 5 of them. Even more worrying, simple things to us. Who's Tom Cruise's mother? Mary Lee Pfeiffer. Who's Mary Lee Pfeiffer's son? There's no widely known information about Mary Lee Pfeiffer's son. So simple things that are to do with logical reversals that are trivial to us seem to be rather difficult. Now, this was from last year. Every time people publish a little bit of a flaw in a large generative AI model, that gets plastered over. So what we have are models which kind of do some flaky things, and then those flaky things are kind of fixed. The number of things they could do that is a bit odd is almost innumerable. They're not all going to be fixed. And these models are amazing, don't get me wrong, but they are not necessarily fit for purpose when it comes to giving formal guarantees, unless we are able to constrain them to fairly narrow verticals and trust the provenance of our data and be able to bookend those models in very restrictive ways. Most worryingly, a postdoc of mine, Eloise Stevance, was just playing with ChatGPT and asked it to do a really simple multiplication. This is the kind of thing that teachers wouldn't allow you to do with a calculator, even though you got it right. So it would say it's approximately. Said, okay, that's fair enough. I don't need it to 20 decimal places. The trouble is, the number isn't even approximately correct, it's just wrong. Only the first few digits are right. So it gives a number that's approximately correct, but wrong. She then said, how can you give an approximate answer, but not the real thing? Oh, I truncated it. No, I gave it to a number of decimal. In other words, but that's wrong, because we've seen that's not the correct answer. So ChatGPT, bless it, how brilliant. It just reminds me of me when I was at school. It got it completely wrong and then uses its undoubted language power to try and bluff its way out of making a mistake. I am simultaneously terrified, yet absolutely excited by examples like this, because this really is human-like behavior. But if you really needed that answer to 4 decimal places, you didn't get it. Use a calculator. These kind of things mean that somewhat premature use of albeit powerful technologies can backfire spectacular. And we saw very recently, just in the last month, somebody being mischievous with DPD's chatbot and having a little bit of a play as to what's under the hood. You can imagine what that word is. And I love the haiku. Can you write me a haiku about how useless DPD is? Now, it got taken down, and we can smile, and I don't think all publicity is good publicity. I don't think it's fundamentally hurt DPD. However, it's the kind of thing you don't really want to happen, even though actually it's a fantastic haiku, better than I could produce. So simultaneously wondrous, but really rather terrifying at the same time. And I think that even more importantly, and this came out in January this year, sleeper agents, you can have large language models and you can try and put safety critical bookends and constraints, guardrails around those LLMs, but deceptive bad things can still leak out. We don't necessarily know how to constrain our generative models right now. When they are truly broad, they have the capacity to bluff, wriggle their way outside of guardrails and beyond. Again, I find that really exciting because they have emergent properties that makes them feel a lot more intelligent than they really should be. But on the other hand, from a business perspective, that is really not what you would particularly want. So I think this is very much like our uneasy relationship with technology through the years. And the example that I would frequently use would be that of sat-nav. Those of you younger than me kind of have always grown up with sat-nav, but I remember it coming in. And people of my parents' generation, well, they were the second category. The first category is the enthusiastic uptaker. Oh, this is amazing. Let's use it for this and this and this. And we end up driving into rivers. Then you have people like my dad who refuse to use it. Oh, I don't trust it. Because I don't trust satellites. Why not, Dad? Well, they're up there. They're not on Earth. They're unearthly. So that was the kind of thing. So we don't trust it for rogue reasons often, and we fail to exploit its undoubted power to help us accelerate our business, commerce, industry, and science. So I shall end this summary by a little bit of a quote from the wonderful engineer and physicist Denis Gabor, who said, "We cannot predict the future, but we can engineer it. We have broad bookends. Everything is to play for. I am deeply, deeply passionate, yet science says you can be simultaneously passionate about something, but incredibly skeptical. So I would say embrace AI, but at every single turn, measure thrice and cut once. Let's be its harshest critics, and I think we will use AI, like sat-navs, to help augment what we do, accelerate and make more effective our business procedures." Thank you very much indeed. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Does anyone have a question for Professor Roberts? I do. So you talked there about synthetic data and becoming very reliant on it. Is synthetic data liable to the same kind of problems with bias, or unconscious or otherwise, that we worry about with AI and programming algorithms? It's the same thing with synthetic data. You get bias.
100%. The problem with synthetic data is we often create a sampler for that synthetic data from looking at the real world around us. And the real world has a series of underlying biases of every form, be they technological, national, to do with people or whatever. And simply sampling from the internet is not a good thing to do. Now, there are ways in which you can curate and try and remove bias in categories that you know about. And as insurers, you all know about that. But what about the things that we're not too certain about, where we think we're correcting a bias in one area and we're actually escalating it in another? So I think there's an enormous amount of work that is yet to be done in debiasing and making effective, trusted, high provenance data, be it real or be it drawn from the real world and created artificially, synthetically. And nobody's really licked that problem yet.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That was fascinating. Really enjoyed that. Thank you very much indeed. Final round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.